And we are back with the third segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this third segment, we are going to be looking at the WNBA playoff games that happened over this weekend. And before I do that, I do want to acknowledge Mazzano in the chat once again. He added another comment saying, I always have spirited conversations with people. They say basketball is the only sport that you can rely on one player to make a difference. It's not like baseball, hockey, or football. And I mean, no, that's not really how basketball works. Like all of those sports and every sport, it's a team sport for a reason. You need competent team players in order to actually succeed. I mean, you cannot just rely on one player, because if you just rely on one player, that just makes it easier for the other team to come up with defensive assignments and come up with really bad situations for that one player. And if your one player is getting locked up, then there goes your entire offense. Now, the question is, do you guys by any chance have an NHL podcast? That's a very good question, and I don't think we do yet. I'm sure that will be coming soon. So I'm actually going to, speaking of which, now that you mention it, I'm going to go and talk. I'm going to send a text to my boss and ask him about that the exact question. So give me 1 second. Because I'm pretty sure, I do remember that we did have an NHL show host. However, I'm not entirely sure if he's still the host of NHL or if we're getting a new one. So that I'll keep you posted on that one. But we're going to go ahead and go into the third segment, which is going to be talking about the WNBA playoffs. The games ended up happening on Sunday. Again, the same time as Sunday football. I said this before. I'm going to say it again, and I'm going to keep saying this until they change it. Change the schedules of these games, because having WNBA games at the same time as football is hurting the WNBA's ratings in the postseason. Not to mention the fact that Caitlin Clark has already been eliminated from the postseason, so already people aren't going to really want to tune into the WNBA anymore. And the fact that these games are happening at the same time as NFL football, more chances that they're not going to go ahead and tune into this game. It's really, really, really not the best idea to have these games held on Sunday or at any time when there's football going around. And it baffles me. It really, really baffles me. And hold on just 1 second. There we go. It's like, I just don't understand, like, why are we having these games at the same time as football? And spoilers, I didn't watch these games. I didn't watch the entirety of these games. I watched little bits and pieces when there was commercial with football going around, but still, I tuned into a lot more football than I did to these WNBA games. And really, it's just like, this is a problem, because like, it really is a problem. And Manzano's in the chat, you watch both the NBA and WNBA playoffs. Which one do you feel is constantly more entertaining, where you don't know who's going to win the championship, where the teams are so even? It's definitely the NBA, because the WNBA is way more top-heavy, because there are way more fewer teams in the WNBA than there are in the NBA. And since there are fewer teams, and since there are really like fewer impact players on said teams, there's a lot more that can happen in the NBA playoffs than there can in the WNBA playoffs. Not to mention, the NBA playoffs, regardless of what round you're in, is a 7-game series. The WNBA playoffs, however, the first round is just a best of 3, and then the next rounds beyond that are a best of 5. So that means there are fewer games for the WNBA to be played, and if there are fewer games to be played, that means there's less likely of a chance that something magical or some crazy comeback or like some crazy underdog team can end up advancing into the next round. Because, like, put this in perspective. So let's say like the losing team, like the team with the lower seed in the WNBA, loses in game 1. That means that they have way more pressure on them in the next game to steal that game in order to have a chance for their season to continue. That pressure could affect them in that game. In the NBA, however, if you lose in game 1, no big deal, because you still have another game that you can play and try to steal. And if you lose that game, again, it's not that big of a deal. You have the 2 other home games where you have the potential to tie the series in there and then make the series competitive again by possibly even stealing the next game in Game 5. So, like, there's more opportunities for teams to steal games in the NBA postseason than there are in the WNBA postseason. And as a result of that, there's also more chances for upsets to happen. Granted, that's most likely, it doesn't really happen that often, but when it does, it happens way more in the NBA than it does in the WNBA, because the WNBA is incredibly top-heavy. Like, in the first round of the postseason, every single team swept in a victory, and it was clear-cut that the higher-seeded teams were the better teams against the lower-seeded teams. Like, it was clear as day. And Manzano's still in the chat saying, this is the idiocy of the commissioner for the WNBA doing this instead of having your season, start at the end of the football season after the Super Bowl and finish in June or July. No, I can't really agree with that either, because that's when the NBA season goes on. And there aren't going to be that many people that are going to be tuning into WNBA games as much as they're going to be tuning into NBA games. And that's just depending on who's being played. Like, I mean, Caitlin Clark, maybe she can pull in a lot more viewers than an NBA game, but that's just Caitlin Clark. Like, you need to have, if you're going to have these postseasons, you have to have them at some time in the summer, maybe like in August. I understand that the Olympics sort of interfered with that, so maybe that has something to do with the scheduling, but again, these games can happen when these games can totally happen. It's just they have to happen at a time when the NBA they have to happen at a time when football isn't happening. That's really the big concern here. Now, onto the games themselves. The Liberty ended up winning in Game 1, ended up winning 87-77, and the Liberty have a lot of pieces on their team. Way more pieces than the Aces have, where, similar to the point that I just brought up before, they only have 1 or 2 players that can legitimately provide on the offense, being Aja Wilson and Kelsey Plum. And those 2 players, yes, they did play great, but they did not play nearly as efficient enough to be a close competition against the Liberty, who have several pieces to play well. I mean, Brenna Stewart ended up scoring 34 points in this game. She ended up going off. Sabrina Ionescu also ended up going off with 21 points in this game. Brenna Stewart, 12 for 19 from the field as well. And they did have, it was really those two players that were providing a lot, but the bench and everybody on the bench ended up scoring, and everybody that ended up coming into the game ended up scoring for the Liberty. However, on the Aces side, there were several players in the rotation that ultimately ended up not scoring, which ended up being the detriment of the team. And either that or they weren't scoring nearly as much as the rest of the bench, because the bench points were rather similar. It was really just the game of Brenna Stewart. Brenna Stewart really won the Liberty this game for them. And I mean, right now they hold the series lead at 1-0. Again, this is a best of 5, so they have to win 3 games in order to advance into the next round and go into the finals. This is also a finals rematch, it should be noted. Now, the Connecticut Sun ended up beating the Minnesota Lynx by 3 points, so it was a nail-biter of a game, and this was the first upset win throughout the entirety of the postseason. This was the first upset win throughout the entirety of the WNBA postseason. And again, winning 73-70 means that the game was rather close. So the Lynx could easily bounce back in the next game and make the series shift into their favor. And it should be some of the notable players for the team from the Sun. Marina Mabry ended up scoring 20 points. And Alyssa Thomas ended up scoring 17 points and ended up recording 10 rebounds, as well. DeJounte Carrington ended up scoring 13 points, ended up getting 9 rebounds, also 2 steals as well. And they got, it was a pretty even matchup between these two teams, and it really came down to the wire. And I'm just gonna go ahead and look at the play-by-play just to see how the game ended. And Alyssa Thomas ended up making a 2-point jump shot after Minnesota ended up making the game within one, and eventually that sealed the win. So the score was, with around 50 seconds left in the quarter, the score was 71 to 68 after Alyssa Thomas ended up making a 2-point layup. Then afterwards, Nafisa Collier ended up making a 2-point layup as well, and the score was within 71 to 70. And it's around this point in the game where the best players and the best, teams and the clutch time gene really shows up. And Alyssa Thomas ended up answering the call yet again and made a 2-point jump shot with the help of Veronica Burton on the assist to make the score 73 to 70 to close out the game, as Nafisa Collier ended up missing a 3-point turnaround fadeaway jump shot as the clock expired. And that's how the game ended. So these games are still going to be, obviously, they follow the same format as the NBA, so it goes, the higher seed ends up getting 2 home games, and then the lower seed gets their 2 home games, and then if necessary, the higher seed would end up playing in game 5 in their home court. So that's that's all that I have to say about the WNBA playoffs and the WNBA postseason. The next games are going to happen tomorrow, 7:30, 9:30, respectively. Again, these are much better times to actually work with because this is around a time where there is no football going on, which is what they need to do. And this is, this is sort of how it goes. So again, this is all that I really have to say about the WNBA game. So now we will go ahead and go into the 4th segment where I talk about college basketball. Whoa, too much into college football right now this season. And we're going to go ahead and look at the March Madness tournament and where the games are going to be held, when these games are going to be held, and so that way you guys can go ahead and plan out your trips. Maybe I might pop out to some of these games. We don't know yet, but we'll be right back after this short break to talk about the March Madness game. So be sure to stay tuned.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC. To access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.